You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today I have Product Director of Alto, which is part of the Houseful Group, Owen Rogers. Houseful, probably best known for their product Zoopla, although I have been chastised for saying that Zoopla is the lead brand. It really isn't. Houseful is the lead brand now, isn't it? Zoopla is simply part of it. But great to have you on the podcast, Owen. Thank you for joining. We're going to talk about Movemnt very specifically, which is another Houseful product and something that is going to impact or potentially impact conveyancers over the course of the next few years, you hope. In the first instance, though, tell me about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Thanks, David. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So my name's Owen Rogers. As you said, I'm a product director at Houseful. To give your listeners an idea of what a product director does, in technology businesses like Houseful, we're responsible for innovation. So we think about what we build in what order and who we build it for. And then we help the business kind of manage that all the way from inception through to delivery. And as you said, Houseful's kind of a conglomerate of a number of different brands. We've got Zoopla, which everyone knows and hopefully loves. We have a business called Hometrack, which is what the majority of banks use to make automated lending decisions on, instead of sending necessarily a surveyor to the house. And then we've got Alto Software Group, which is everything estate agents use to run their business. So that's the area that I'm most focused on. We probably have about 40% of all estate agents running their business on our CRMs, with Alto being the flagship. We also have a flagship new home CRM, that's for property developers, called Yourkeys. And then this new product called Movemnt. And the job of Movemnt and the task in front of me is how do we think about all the opportunity, data, brands, products that we have within Houseful, and how do we support the improvement in the home transaction, working now with conveyancers, leveraging the kind of some of those parts.
You've started on Movemnt. Let's pick up there. You're saying that you're trying to leverage the Houseful group of brands and data and clients that you hold in that space. Mm-hmm. What is Movemnt? What does it do? What are you hoping it's going to do?
I think the best way to describe it is, and I'll try and frame this up for conveyancers more than anything, because I know the audience is here. It's a network where conveyancers can connect with the rest of the Houseful ecosystem to do two things. Firstly, it helps to grow their business because Movemnt is connected into all the estate agent CRMs where estate agents are looking to refer work to conveyancers. It's also connected to Zoopla, where consumers can now find conveyancers on the Movemnt network. And we're also plugged into Uswitch and Confused.com and the new homes product called Yourkeys. So firstly, it's a place where you can come and get work distributed to you as a conveyancer, and that's a really important part of the proposition. Secondly, it's an integration layer. So as you work with the property professionals, brokers, estate agents, and the consumers, we're able to pull information directly from the case management system and broadcast that across the network to create consumer communications efficiencies. And then thirdly, I think the probably third corner of the triangle, if you like, is that it's a data exchange. So because we are right at the top of the transaction where the estate agent is being instructed, we know what properties are about to transact first, and we can start to acquire the data very early on in the process and get the transaction off to a great start. But I think the final point I'll make about it is the intention of it is also to be a place where we collaborate with conveyancers and other property professionals to think about the visionary solution for the home transaction. I think where some of our competitors in this kind of home transaction network space have focused, they've sort of asked everyone to come and pay for a network, but it only has value if everyone's using it. And that's one of the big problems of these networks. You're only as strong as your weakest link when it comes to managing a property. So if you're using a network but someone else isn't, it's going to be a bit troublesome. So we're focused on generating that distribution and the usage of the network first through the CRMs and the consumer brands, and we are off to a great start in improving home transactions as a result of the products we have knitted into that network. But there will be a next stage where we start to collaborate with everyone using it and it's getting benefit from the network, and that's where we are now.
What I've heard in a lot of what you've said there is that this sounds, and forgive me for being a little blunt, like another panel management solution.
Is there a question in that?
Is that how you're positioning it here?
No, not at all. But distribution to conveyancers is a crucial part of wanting people to work together, people that want to work together, basically. Why are we going to be collaborated with? Why are our products going to be considered as part of the conveyancing journey if we're not giving something back to the industry at the same time? So there is a corner of the proposition that relates to that. There are expectations of the way conveyancers kind of on board and do stuff, but it is also that data exchange, that connectivity layer. It's integrating information directly from conveyancer systems over to the other actors in the home transaction. It's a place where we start that conversation to add more and more products in a way that supports conveyancers, rather than telling conveyancers, which I think has happened in the past, this is how it's going to run. Like, we're taking a much more consultative and collaborative approach.
Is this a play around these material information changes that are being introduced into the agency sector? And I guess if it is, how do you see that it's going to benefit conveyancers further down the transaction?
I think the trading standards material information stuff is definitely a catalyst event in the industry. You saw parts A and part A come out, which was pretty much kind of your bog standard property information. But as we got closer into parts B, and then especially part C, where you're talking about restricted covenants and flood risks and stuff like that, really you're starting to pull forward the things that conveyancers understand and assess the risk on into the listing. So there is a regulatory event for sure that is driving conveyancers further up to the top of the transaction with the estate agent, and that is one reason that we felt we were well placed to bridge that collaboration. But it's not the only reason we did it at all. If you think about our estate agents, that one of their key problems is the speed at which business closes and the communications friction, etc., that they have to deal with. So there's a big drive from our customer base, there's regulatory pressure, and there's just an amazing market opportunity as we start to see the shape of data sharing, etc., and the technology that you can use. It felt like the right time for us to dip our toe into these waters, for sure.
I want to stick with that. One of the challenges that I see is, and you've identified that part C is the opportunity, is how we create a service, whether it is a service, or how we create the tools to enable conveyancers to provide that part C information, either without it costing a huge amount of money or enabling them to charge for it, so that the agents can comply with those new advisory requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. Who picks up the bill, I think, is the summary of that. I don't think that there's one pathway through that, actually. You already have companies providing this data in an automated way to estate agents. And remember, I think it's actually estate agents that are sort of liable for this information on the listing now. So they're going to need confidence in it. And that's one thing. And at the moment, we already see the bill for that data being picked up by different parties. Sometimes the estate agent absorbs it in either some kind of listings cost to the consumer or the client, or they may just include it in their commission, basically, and write it off as a slight bite out of their margin on a per transaction basis. The other way we see agents leveraging, considering this cost, is just to pass it directly onto the vendor. What I think is curious is, can that data be reused later down the transaction by the conveyancers, and to what extent do they have confidence in it? I think that's probably where networks like ours come into play. Now, I know from speaking with conveyancers that they have huge insurance premiums, and they're always left. They are the ones responsible. They are picking up the risk. If things go bang in the transaction, something goes wrong later down the line, the lender's coming for them, and that's really drives a lot of their operational practices and their risk profile. So if we're going to talk about data that's being acquired earlier on in the transaction that conveyancers are going to reuse, it's going to be incumbent on networks like us to make sure that data is trustworthy and probably start to absorb some of the liability relating to that data, so that conveyancers we're not just sort of ramming risk towards the conveyancers that already have a huge risk profile to manage.
You talked about collaboration. You talked about being a conduit, I suppose, through which people can communicate and can share information. And I think you've identified that there is a lot of siloed thinking and a lot of work going on in silos in and around the sector. Is Movemnt an open piece of software that some of these organizations that you've talked about that are providing upfront information and that kind of thing, will they be able to plug into it, or are you using your own houseful products and services to populate that?
Yeah, so it's open to the extent that we'll converse with anyone that's interested in adding to the network. I think when we think of it being an open network, we particularly mean estate agents, brokers, consumers, conveyancers that can come and operate over it. It will be difficult to necessarily say every single data provider, etc., can just come in. And we have Hometrack, which is a major data business. It's not by any means the only data business that we use already. Really, what we're looking for is partners that we can work with that are going to create that trustworthy data, reliable, fast, right kind of commercial risk model when it's being acquired up front. So it's open to the extent that we're open to talking and working with anyone where it makes sense. I think there will always be certain standards that have to be hit if you want to integrate with a network like us, especially when we're talking about the legal risks that occur from the use of that data.
And just sticking with that sharing data theme, one of the things that happens at the moment is a huge amount of duplication of effort all the way through the transaction. And people talk about IDV and source of funds and source of wealth and that kind of thing, but there's lots of other duplication that happens. Do you see that Movemnt is going to facilitate a much smoother consumer experience?
Yes, we hope so. Yeah.
That's an easy answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you saw, but the data use and access bill coming through accepted by by Parliament recently. So that is going to be something that, again, legislatively is sort of driving things forward a little bit. It's going to compel the industry to start sharing data at the request of the consumer in this instance, because they're going to be able to request ID and AML shared with authorized and accredited parties. So there's a combination of, will the conveyancers that are working with us and the other property professionals wish to share data in exchange for the distribution that we're sending to them to make the transaction go faster? Because transparently, there's also sometimes a consideration for margin when you're starting to reduce this duplication, like potentially across lots of different professionals. So, we're intending to drive business up for these partners that are working with Movemnt, and therefore deduplication of effort and acquisition of data once as opposed to multiple times still becomes a net positive for the experience and efficiency gain, and can still protect their margins. But as a kind of backup, I think we have encroaching legislation that's really going to encourage the sharing of this. But back to my earlier point, what's going to happen to the conveyancer premiums? Our insurer is going to say, oh yeah, it's fine, there's this bit of legislation that's come through Parliament, now you can just accept any ID and AML check from an estate agent. I think there's going to be a lot more work, and it's going to be on networks like us to work with insurers to talk about what happens when a conveyancer uses this data and where it comes from. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight still, but we are definitely starting to see some partnerships occur and reuse that data as is the sort of promised land for the future.
One of the prompts for getting this podcast set up actually was a press release that was circulated to Today's Conveyancer a couple of months ago, saying that Movemnt was already working with 6 of the 10 largest conveyancers in the UK. And I was saying to you before we started recording, it almost came completely out of the blue, Owen. You seem to have sort of snuck in under the radar with really quite a sizable investment and product.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that journey?
Yeah, well, we didn't build this product overnight by any means. We've been working in the background, and actually it's been in action for some time before the actual press release, and internally named different within Houseful. So we came out of the blocks with those existing partnerships, partly because I think we've made a great strategic partner in LMS, who obviously have great connectivity into conveyancers already, and partly because, when we approach the conveyancers to say yes to the network, they can see the distribution opportunity that we're going to give as part of the network, but also the early data and connectivity and integration product that's going to help them operationally. We also, I feel, when we went out to market and talked to conveyancers, we importantly were leaving that space to talk about the next stage. We weren't saying, and this is what you're going to do next, and this is what you're going to do next. Instead, we say, let's get to this point, let's improve the transaction up to here, prove that value exchange is working, which it really is now, and then let's consult on what the next stages of the build is.
I know your answer to this because it's fairly obvious because you work for the organisation, but there's a lot of false dawns going on. I think it's fair to say a lot of legal tech that's coming out at the moment. I think I can probably share, because it's been said to me that this is a significant investment on your part. I mean, 8 figures from what I understand, and more.
Depends how you count it, but yeah, it's a significant investment. I think that's fair to say.
I guess, as I say, I know your answer will be yes, but are Houseful the right organisation to really lead in this space?
Well, the reason why I think so is because we really possess all the component parts of a business that is needed to create that network effect. I think, as I said before, the value of these networks is intrinsically linked to the number of people that are using them and the access to the data products, the integration capability. Well, we already have the estate agent market sort of wrapped up. We have the property data for lenders wrapped up. The strategic partnership with LMS brings together the conveyancing side of the business. And I would say in isolation, Houseful actually, we were missing that conveyancer connectivity, those conveyancer relationships, which was why we felt it was really important to pull that partnership together. We didn't go direct to every conveyancer and start integrating one by one and doing that. We see this as a collaborative effort, but where certainly you need a partnership like that to be well positioned to lead this kind of transformation. I can't think, you can tell me if you've got a challenge to that, of another business that's as well positioned with its products, its distribution, its development house, and its partnerships. If they are there, you have to tell me, and I'll have to get a new job.
Well, I guess by comparison, Rightmove haven't gone down this route. On the market don't appear to be going down this route either, do they?
No.
So I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, and I appreciate there are probably commercial sensitivities here as well, is it your view that Houseful will continue to be acquisitive and identify organizations that are going to add value to the organization?
Yeah, I actually, I don't speak for or the Houseful's acquisition brand and side of the business, particularly. My personal view as the director of product on this is why create a space for everyone to integrate into if you're going to buy the companies anyway and just make them part of the product. So we much more consider Movemnt, along with partnership with LMS, the pipe work, the data exchange, the integration space, where partners can come along and work with us. So I'm much more on the lookout for innovative tech solutions that can come and add value to the network and can be adopted by the network over time.
Fast moving towards the end of the discussion, but as a data-rich organization, and I don't know how much prep you've had chance to do for this, Owen, given that the budget was yesterday.
Yeah.
But predictions for what the market kind of looks like, and what, I guess, ultimately what you're already seeing through the volume of work that you're doing. What's the estate agency market looking like? I mean, at the moment, there's a huge amount of activity there. We're struggling to get them through to completion. And what are you kind of seeing as an organization?
Let's go macro to begin with. The housing market is more balanced than at any time in the last 5 years. We've got rising incomes and the lowest mortgage rates for a couple of years, and that's supporting the highest level of new sales agreed since, I think, autumn sort of 2020. That pipeline of sales agreed working through to completion is the largest it's been in 4 years now, and we got something like 30% higher than last year. So broadly, I think things are looking up and things are looking quite stable for estate agents and for conveyancers. One thing I think is interesting is that first-time buyers are on track to be the largest buyer group at 36% this year, and that's probably going to continue into next year. And I think that's interesting for conveyancers because you've got a lot of people coming to the market that don't have incumbent relationships. I think that's a really interesting dynamic in a market, and you might see some redistribution of kind of business growth as a result of that. Obviously, the budget's just landed, but there's a couple of things in there I think we noticed. So the extra 2% cost of stamp duty on buying second homes, I think that's going to reduce the demand from second home buyers and investors. But equally, since I think it was last year's budget, when it landed, it allowed councils to charge double council tax with second homes as well. And I think basically you're seeing a netting off in the second homes market. So I think there'll be sort of reasonable stability there still. And also I think, certainly for second home owners, it's positive to see that the capital gains tax hasn't increased. So not too concerned about that. And generally seems like a buoyant and stable market, not too spiky, and also not too many troughs, which is good to see. I think I've covered some of the major, I guess, trends I think I see in a more focused in way. As we've discussed, the NTS material information requirements for agents, I think will continue to drive conveyancers closer to agents and consumers at the point of instructing the estate agent. Generally in that market, we do see a consolidation of estate agency market, and I think I'm actually no expert on the dynamics of conveyancing M&A, but I think you're probably seeing that on the conveyancing side as well. So hypothetically, you've got less businesses that need to make stronger connections. And then apart from that, we're an active member of the Open Property Data Association. We do care about sort of pushing the agenda of shareable data, and I think with the data use and access bill, I think it's called being welcomed into Parliament. It'll take a while to wiggle its way through the House of Lords, but you're going to see sharing of crucial information become more common and, slightly, I guess, even slightly more imposed. But as mentioned, I think that's got to come with respect for conveyancers, because they're still holding the bag when it comes to, risk relating to the transaction and, how the lender views whether things have gone well or not. So we're definitely going to have to engage with insurers and talk about where liability sits before I think any of that gets off the ground. It's certainly not going to be an overnight thing.
It's been a whistle-stop tour through Houseful and Movemnt, and a bit about the market as well. It's been great to have you on the podcast, Owen, telling us about what's happening in the Houseful world. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks very much, David.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Owen. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.